sick. Husband demands to know inheritance amount. Unaware, she discovered his secret lie. What would you do if someone knocked on your door and told you that your life was about to change forever? Would you believe them? Or would you, like Helen Chambers, assume it was some kind of cruel joke? The sharp knock on her apartment door came at exactly 7:13 a.m. Helen had already been awake for 2 hours, preparing David's morning medication and packing her lunch for her double shift. Dark circles hung beneath her eyes like permanent fixtures, souvenirs from 5 years of marriage to a chronically ill husband. "Just a minute," Helen called, wiping her hands on her faded apron. She wasn't expecting anyone, especially not at this hour when she needed to leave for her first job in 20 minutes. When she opened the door, a tall man in an immaculate gray suit stood before her, leather briefcase in hand. His presence seemed out of place in her modest apartment building, where the elevator had been broken for months. "Mrs. Helen Chambers?" he asked, his voice carrying the practiced formality of someone who delivered life-altering news for a living. "Yes, that's me." Helen tucked a strand of unwashed hair behind her ear, suddenly self-conscious of her appearance. "My name is Jonathan Porter, from Blackwell & Associates law firm. I'm here regarding the estate of Claire Winters. May I come in?" Helen's breath caught in her throat. Aunt Claire? The aunt she hadn't seen in nearly 3 years? Is she? Helen couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm sorry to inform you that Ms. Winters passed away last week. Heart failure. It was peaceful, according to her doctor." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Aunt Claire had always been a shadow figure in Helen's life, appearing occasionally, with sharp criticisms, and disappearing just as quickly. Their relationship had grown even more distant after Helen married David, whom Claire openly despised. "Please come in," Helen said mechanically, moving aside. "I'm sorry for the mess. I wasn't expecting company." As the lawyer settled at her tiny kitchen table, Helen's mind raced. She should feel sad, shouldn't she? But all she felt was a hollow numbness, and guilt for that numbness. "Mrs. Chambers, I'm here because you are the sole beneficiary of your aunt's estate." Helen almost laughed. There must be some mistake. Aunt Claire lived in a 1-bedroom apartment and drove a car older than me. Mr. Porter's expression remained unchanged as he opened his briefcase and removed a folder. "That may have appeared to be the case, but your aunt's situation was considerably different than it seemed." From the bedroom came a harsh, demanding voice. "Helen, who's out there? I need my pills." The lawyer raised an eyebrow as Helen's shoulders tensed visibly. "My husband," she explained quietly. "He's not well." "I see. Perhaps we should speak quickly then." He slid a document across the table. "Your Aunt Claire was an extremely private person, but she was also a highly successful collector and dealer of antique jewelry and rare artifacts." Helen stared at the paper, the numbers blurring before her eyes. This couldn't be right. The figure had too many zeros. This can't be correct," she whispered. "I assure you it is. Your aunt liquidated much of her collection to a foreign buyer shortly before her passing. The funds, along with her remaining collection and property, now belong to you." "Helen!" David's voice came again, sharper this time. Mr. Porter lowered his voice. "There is something else your aunt wanted me to tell you personally." He pulled out an envelope. She said, "Tell Helen that now she can finally be free of that parasitic leech. Don't let him get a penny of it." Helen's face burned with embarrassment. Even from beyond the grave, Aunt Claire was judging her choices. "I'll leave you my card," the lawyer said, standing. "We'll need to meet at our offices to complete the paperwork. Call when you're ready, but don't wait too long." After he left, Helen stood frozen in her kitchen, the document clutched in her trembling hand. Millions. Her frugal, critical aunt had left her millions. Who was that? David appeared in the doorway, his hair perfectly styled despite his supposed weakness, his expensive pajamas a stark contrast to Helen's threadbare clothes. "Nobody," Helen said automatically, years of protective instinct kicking in. She quickly folded the paper and tucked it into her pocket. "Just someone with the wrong address." David's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "You're lying. I heard voices. Was it about money? Are we behind on the hospital payments again?" "No, we're fine," Helen said, turning back to making his breakfast. "Everything's fine." But as she cracked eggs into the pan, a strange feeling bubbled up inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. Was it hope? "I need to be driven to my treatment at 11, David reminded her, scrolling through his phone. "Mom says she'll meet us there." Helen nodded. mind elsewhere. For the first time in 5 years, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where she wasn't perpetually exhausted, where she didn't work herself to the bone for a man who never showed an ounce of gratitude. What would Aunt Claire want her to do with this money? The answer came immediately. She'd want Helen to escape, but could she? After all this time? David's voice cut through her thoughts. What are you smiling about? The eggs are burning, for Christ's sake. Can't you do anything right? Helen quickly removed the pan from the heat, her smile vanishing. Sorry, she murmured, the familiar word bitter on her tongue. Little did she know that in just 7 days, everything would change, and the woman who apologized for burning eggs would become unrecognizable, even to herself. The fluorescent lights of Walker's Diner buzzed overhead as Helen refilled coffee cups with mechanical precision. Her morning shift had started at 8:30 a.m., immediately after dropping David off at his mother's house. By 2:00 p.m., she would trade her waitress apron for a receptionist badge at Dr. Peterson's dental office, finishing her second shift at 8 p.m., just in time to pick up David from his support group. Order up for table 7. Jerry, the short order cook, called out. Helen grabbed the plates, ignoring the burning sensation against her fingertips. Physical pain had become such a constant companion that she barely registered it anymore. What was a little heat compared to the crushing weight that had become her daily existence? You look like hell warmed over, honey, said Dolores, a 60-something waitress who had taken Helen under her wing. That husband of yours keeping you up all night with his medical emergencies again? Helen managed a weak smile. It's nothing, just the usual. Humph, Dolores snorted, expertly balancing 4 plates on her arm. Nothing about what you're going through is usual. Nobody should have to work themselves to death like you do. What choice do I have? Helen whispered, more to herself than to Dolores. His treatments cost a fortune, even with insurance. And you know how he gets if I suggest cutting back. The last time Helen had suggested they downsize from their 2-bedroom apartment to something more affordable, David had thrown such a violent tantrum that the neighbors called the police. He'd been all tears and apologies when the officers arrived, explaining that his illness sometimes made him emotional. Helen had backed his story, of course. She always did. There's always a choice, sweetie, Dolores said, her weathered face softening. You just haven't found yours yet. During her lunch break, a pitiful 15 minutes, Helen sat in her car and stared at the lawyer's business card. Mr. Porter, the bearer of impossible news. She hadn't told David about the inheritance. Yet, some instinct, buried deep beneath years of submission, warned her to keep it secret until she figured out what to do. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Where's my lunch? Mom says hospital called. Need to go in early. Pick me up now. Helen's heart raced with panic. She was supposed to be at Dr. Peterson's in 30 minutes. If she left now to take David to the hospital, she'd be late. Again. Dr. Peterson had already warned her after the last 3 tardies that one more would cost her the job. Can your mom take you? She texted back, hands trembling. The response was immediate. Are you fucking kidding me? I'm your husband, your priority. Get here now. Tears blurred her vision as she started the car. This was her life, constantly choosing between keeping her job and keeping the peace. And peace was rarely an option. When she arrived at Olivia's house, David was waiting outside, his face a mask of barely contained rage. Took you long enough, he spat, as he climbed into the passenger seat. Despite his supposed weakness, he slammed the door hard enough to make the entire car shake. I'm sorry, David. I came as quickly as I could, Helen said automatically, the words hollow from overuse. Whatever. Just drive, and call Peterson's office. Tell them you'll be late. But David, they said, I don't give a damn what they said. His fist came down on the dashboard. My health is at stake here, Helen. Do you want me to get worse? Is that what you want? No, of course not, she whispered, already dialing the office number with shaking fingers. As expected, Dr. Peterson's receptionist was not sympathetic. I'm sorry, Helen, but Dr. Peterson was very clear last time. If you can't be reliable, we need to find someone who can be. Please, I just need to get my husband to the hospital, and then I'll come straight. Don't bother coming in at all. We'll mail your final check. The line went dead. Helen sat frozen, phone still pressed to her ear. Well? David demanded. I lost the job, she said, her voice small. To her surprise, David shrugged. Probably for the best. You were always complaining about how tired you were. Maybe now you can focus on taking proper care of me." Helen gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles white with tension. 5 years ago, she'd been halfway through her nursing degree when she met David. He'd been charming then, sweeping her off her feet with grand gestures and passionate declarations of love. 6 months after they married, he'd received his first diagnosis, one that, strangely, no doctor ever seemed to fully explain to Helen directly. At the hospital, Olivia was waiting for them in her nurse's uniform, her pinched face a mirror image of her son's current expression. "Finally," she said by way of greeting. "I've been covering for you, David. Dr. Mitchell is waiting." As they walked through the hospital corridors, Helen lagged a step behind, feeling like an outsider in what had become their shared domain. Olivia and David spoke in hushed tones, their conversation stopping whenever Helen came too close. "Wait here," Olivia instructed when they reached a set of double doors, family only beyond this point. "But I'm his wife," Helen protested weakly. David gave her a cold look. "Just do as Mom says. I'll text you when we're done." Alone in the waiting room, Helen pulled out her phone and checked her bank account. The numbers made her stomach clench. 247.32s. Not enough for next week's rent, let alone David's medications and the special organic food he insisted was the only thing his sensitive system could tolerate. And now, she was down to one job. A notification popped up on her screen. An email from Mr. Porter. "Mrs. Chambers, please contact me at your earliest convenience to discuss your inheritance. Time is of the essence." Helen closed her eyes, leaning her head against the wall. What would it be like to not worry about money for once? To not feel the crushing weight of responsibility for someone who never showed an ounce of gratitude? "Are you okay, dear?" An elderly woman had sat down beside her, eyeing Helen with concern. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." Helen opened her mouth to give her standard response. "I'm fine." But instead, a small broken sound escaped her lips. "Two worlds," she whispered. "I'm carrying the weight of two worlds." Helen sat on a park bench across from the hospital, clutching a cold cup of vending machine coffee. David's emergency treatment had already stretched to 3 hours, and her texts remained unanswered. This was nothing new. Being left in waiting rooms had become as routine as his midnight demands for specific foods she'd have to drive across town to find. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows that reminded Helen of summers at Aunt Claire's cottage. Before David, before everything changed. Claire Winters had never been the warm, cookie-baking type of aunt. She was sharp-edged and fiercely independent, traits that Helen's mother, Claire's younger sister, had always resented. Too selfish to settle down, her mother would say. No man wants a woman who speaks her mind that way. How strange that Helen had grown up to be exactly what her mother wanted, accommodating to the point of self-erasure, while Claire had lived exactly as she pleased. Helen pulled out her phone and scrolled to the last text she'd received from Claire, dated nearly 8 months ago. "Remember who you were before him, Helen. That woman is still inside you, suffocating." She hadn't responded. What could she say? Claire had never understood that love required sacrifice. At least, that's what Helen had told herself over and over, as she surrendered more pieces of herself to David's demands. "Mrs. Chambers?" Helen looked up, startled to see Mr. Porter standing before her in the same immaculate suit from that morning. "Mr. Porter? How did you—" "Your message mentioned you'd be at Mercy General this afternoon." He gestured to the bench. "May I join you?" Helen nodded, suddenly self-conscious of her waitress uniform. "I apologize for this unexpected visit," he said, sitting beside her. "But there are aspects of your aunt's will that require timely attention." "I still can't believe it," Helen whispered. "I barely knew her. We spoke maybe once a year, and when we did," her voice trailed off, remembering Claire's final Thanksgiving visit 3 years ago. David had been in rare form that day, complaining about the turkey being dry, criticizing Helen's mashed potatoes, dramatically taking his pulse after claiming the gravy was setting off his heart condition. Claire had watched it all with narrowed eyes until she finally set down her fork with a sharp clink. "Does he always treat you like this?" she'd asked Helen directly. "Like what?" David had interjected. "Like a husband who deserves a decent meal." After suffering all week, Claire had ignored him completely. "Helen, answer me." But Helen couldn't. The words had stuck in her throat. "I see," Claire had said, standing up. "Well, I won't witness this. Not on my deceased sister's memory." That was the last time Helen had seen her aunt in person. Your aunt knew you better than you might think, Mr. Porter said, breaking into her memories. She kept detailed notes on your situation. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. She wanted you to have this. It contains her observations over the years, along with information about her collection. Helen took the journal with trembling hands. The leather was soft from years of handling. There's something else, Mr. Porter continued, his voice gentler. Now, your aunt made videos in her final months. They're part of what she called her inheritance guidance. I've brought the first one. He offered her a tablet. Helen stared at the frozen image on the screen. Claire, thinner than Helen remembered, sitting in what looked like a study filled with glass display cases. With hesitant fingers, Helen pressed play. Helen, Claire's voice crackled through the speakers, stronger than her frail appearance suggested. If you're watching this, I've finally died. Don't waste time feeling sad. We both know we weren't close enough for that. Helen's throat tightened at her aunt's characteristic bluntness. What I'm leaving you isn't just money. It's freedom. The same freedom I fought for my entire life. Claire leaned closer to the camera. Your mother, my sister, made the mistake of thinking a woman's worth was measured by her usefulness to a man. I watched her disappear into your father's shadow until there was nothing left of her. Tears welled in Helen's eyes. Her mother had died when Helen was 19, a quiet passing that matched her quiet existence. And now I'm watching history repeat itself with you and that parasite you married. Claire's face hardened. Yes, I'm being harsh. Someone needs to be. You're working yourself to death for a man who's using you, Helen. I've had him investigated. Helen's breath caught. What? Check the envelope marked David in my journal. Claire continued as if anticipating Helen's reaction. I've been having him followed for the past year. What you'll find might hurt, but the truth is, the only way out of the prison you've built around yourself. The video ended abruptly, leaving Helen staring at her own stunned reflection in the darkened screen. With trembling fingers, she opened the journal and found a sealed envelope with David written across it in Claire's elegant script. Your aunt was extremely thorough, Mr. Porter said quietly. She wanted to ensure you had all the facts before making decisions about your inheritance. Helen held the envelope, its weight seemingly disproportionate to its size. Did she want to know? Could she bear it? Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Where are you? Treatment done. Need food. Pick me up front entrance. No, please. No, thank you. Not even a question about how she was doing after losing her job because of him. Helen slipped the envelope back into the journal without opening it. I need time, she told Mr. Porter. Can we meet tomorrow? Of course. He handed her a business card. My personal number is on the back. Call anytime. As he walked away, Helen's phone buzzed again. Hello? Are you ignoring me now? Mom says I need to eat. Immediately after treatment. Get here now. Helen stared at the message, Claire's words echoing in her mind. The truth is, the only way out of the prison you've built around yourself. How had she not seen it before? The prison had been of her own making, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. Each time she ignored her own needs for David's demands, she'd added another bar to her cell. But could she actually leave? After 5 years of being told she wasn't enough, wasn't caring enough, wasn't attentive enough, her phone rang. David, calling now, his impatience escalating. Helen watched it ring, the journal clutched tightly against her chest. For the first time in 5 years, she hit decline. The slam of the car door shattered the tense silence. Helen had finally picked up David after letting him wait for 45 minutes, a small act of rebellion that had cost her dearly. His rage simmered just beneath the surface, his jaw clenched, so tightly she could see the muscles pulsing. What the hell was that about? David hissed as Helen pulled away from the hospital. I had to sit in a wheelchair in the lobby like some abandoned patient. My mother had to extend her shift to stay with me. Helen kept her eyes fixed on the road. I'm sorry. I lost track of time. Lost track of... David let out a bitter laugh. That's your excuse? You lost my job today with your incompetence, and now you're losing track of time. Your job, Helen repeated softly. What? You said I lost your job. It was my job, David. My second job, which I needed to pay for your treatments. David's face darkened. What's gotten into you? Are you on something? Because you're acting really strange today. Helen clutched Claire's journal in her lap, hidden beneath her purse. The envelope inside seemed to burn through the leather, demanding to be opened. Nothing's gotten into me. I'm just tired. David rolled his eyes dramatically. Try living with chronic pain for 5 years, then talk to me about tired. As they pulled into their apartment complex, Helen spotted an unfamiliar car in the visitor's spot. Sleek, black, expensive. Olivia stood beside it, arms crossed and face pinched with annoyance. "What's your mother doing here?" Helen asked. David shrugged with practiced nonchalance. "Probably checking on me after you abandoned me at the hospital." But as they approached, Helen noticed someone else emerging from the car, a woman in a tailored pantsuit who looked vaguely familiar. "David, darling." Olivia rushed forward to help her son from the car, shooting Helen a venomous glare. "Are you all right? You look pale." "I'm fine, Mom," David said, his voice suddenly weaker, leaning heavily on his mother despite having walked unassisted from the hospital to Helen's car just minutes ago. The woman in the pantsuit approached with a practiced smile. "Mrs. Chambers, I'm Rebecca Gleason from First Community Bank. Your husband mentioned you might need financial assistance, so I came prepared to discuss options." Helen's confusion must have shown on her face because Olivia quickly interjected. "I called her, dear. David told me you lost your second job, and with his medical bills piling up." She gave a theatrical sigh. "We need to be practical." "Practical," Helen echoed, looking between the three of them. Inside their apartment, Helen watched in stunned silence as David transformed. His shuffling gait disappeared the moment the banker opened her briefcase. He sat up straighter, the pained expression replaced with keen interest. "So," Rebecca began, "Mrs. Chambers, your mother-in-law mentioned you might be coming into some money soon? An inheritance?" Helen froze. How did they know? I don't." "Helen received news this morning," David interrupted smoothly. "Her aunt passed away last week. Left her something, though we're not sure how much yet." He turned to Helen, eyes suddenly bright with interest. "You haven't mentioned the amount, sweetheart. Did the lawyer say?" The room seemed to shrink around her. 3 pairs of eyes bored into her, waiting. "It's complicated," Helen managed. "The estate is still being valued. But surely they gave you some idea," Olivia pressed. "A ballpark figure?" Helen's mind raced. Why were they so interested? David had barely acknowledged her existence for months, except to demand food or rides or attention for his so-called symptoms. "They did," Helen said carefully. "But it's confidential until the paperwork is finalized." David's face darkened momentarily, before he forced a smile. "Helen, darling, we're family. There are no secrets between us, right? Plus, we need to know for financial planning, for my treatments." The banker nodded eagerly. "Exactly. We could set up a specialized account for medical expenses, possibly a trust. But I'd need to know the approximate amount we're working with." Helen clutched her purse tighter, feeling Claire's journal inside. What would her aunt say in this moment? "I think," Helen said slowly, finding her voice, "that I'd prefer to speak with my own financial advisor first." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Your own financial advisor?" David repeated, his tone dangerously quiet. "Since when do you have a financial advisor?" "Mr. Porter recommended someone," Helen lied, surprised by her own quick thinking. "He said Aunt Claire's estate is complex." Olivia's thin lips pressed into an even thinner line. "David needs certainty about his medical future, Helen. This isn't the time for secrecy." "It's not secrecy," Helen countered. "It's prudence." David stood abruptly, swaying slightly for the banker's benefit. "Mom, Rebecca, could you give us a moment? I need to speak with my wife privately." Once they stepped outside, David's performance ended. He grabbed Helen's wrist, squeezing until she winced. "What game are you playing?" he hissed, his face inches from hers. 5 years I've put up with your mediocre cooking, your constant complaining about being tired, your pathetic little life. The least you could do is share your good fortune with the husband who stood by you despite everything." Helen stared at him, truly seeing him for perhaps the first time. "Stood by me? You've been ill. I've been supporting you." David's laugh was cold, calculated. "Is that what you tell yourself? Poor Helen, the martyr wife? You think I don't see how you love playing the victim? How it makes you feel important to tell your little diner friends about your sick husband?" Tears burned behind Helen's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Let go of my wrist, David. Not until you tell me how much that old bat left you." The disgust in his voice when he referred to Claire snapped something inside Helen. With strength she didn't know she possessed, she wrenched her arm free. "Don't ever speak about my aunt that." "Wait again." David's eyes widened briefly before narrowing. So there's finally a backbone beneath all that doormat personality. Interesting timing, isn't it? The moment money enters the picture, Helen took a step back, rubbing her wrist. I'm going out. I need air. Like hell you are. David blocked her path. Not until you tell me the amount. Every penny. I deserve to know what's coming to us. To us? Helen repeated. Claire left her estate to me, David. Not us. His face contorted with rage, all pretense of illness forgotten. Everything you have belongs to us. That's what marriage is. The door opened, and Olivia peeked in. Is everything all right? We heard raised voices. David instantly transformed, slumping against the wall as if overcome with weakness. I'm just concerned about Helen, the stress of her aunt's passing, and now this inheritance pressure. Olivia rushed to his side, throwing a reproachful, "Look at Helen. See what you've done? His blood pressure can't handle this kind of stress." Helen watched this performance with new eyes, Claire's warnings echoing in her mind. How had she been blind to this for so long? I need to check on something, Helen said, moving toward the bedroom. Excuse me. Once alone, she pulled out her phone and, with trembling fingers, texted Mr. Porter, I need to see you tomorrow, early, and I'm ready to open the envelope. The gray morning light filtered through the blinds as Helen lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She hadn't slept. How could she? With David's snores beside her, a constant reminder of the man who had stolen 5 years of her life. After the banker had left yesterday, he'd alternated between sweet-talking and threatening, trying to extract information about Claire's inheritance. When that failed, he'd fallen back on his most reliable weapon, guilt. Don't you care that I'm suffering? He'd whimpered, suddenly frail again. That experimental treatment in Switzerland could be my only hope, Helen. Do you want me to die? She'd almost broken then, the habit of 5 years nearly overwhelming her newfound resolve. But something had stopped her. Perhaps Claire's voice, echoing from beyond the grave. Helen slipped out of bed, careful not to wake David. She needed to be gone before he stirred. Mr. Porter had agreed to meet her at 7:30 a.m. at a cafe far from their neighborhood. In the bathroom, she stared at her reflection, the dark circles under her eyes, the premature lines etched by stress, the dullness where vitality should be. At 32, she looked a decade older. A soft knock at the front door startled her. Who would be here at 6:15 a.m.? Helen crept through the living room, peering through the peephole. Olivia. Of course. Helen considered pretending to be asleep, but knew the knocking would only grow louder, waking David. With a resigned sigh, she opened the door. Good. You're up, Olivia said, brushing past Helen without waiting for an invitation. She carried a large wicker basket covered with a cloth. I brought David's special breakfast, the protein mix Dr. Mitchell recommended. Helen bit back a retort. There was no Dr. Mitchell in their insurance records. She'd checked months ago when David first mentioned him. Just another fabrication in their elaborate web of lies. David's still asleep, Helen said, keeping her voice low. Olivia set the basket on the kitchen counter and turned to Helen with narrowed eyes. We need to talk about yesterday. There's nothing to discuss. I disagree. Olivia's thin lips pressed into a tight line. Your behavior was completely unacceptable. After everything we've done for you, everything you've done for me, Helen couldn't contain her incredulous laugh. What exactly have you done for me, Olivia? The older woman drew herself up, affronted. I've supported you through David's illness. I've arranged his treatments, coordinated with specialists, advocated for him when you were too busy with your jobs. She spat the last word like it tasted foul. My jobs that paid for those treatments, Helen said quietly. The jobs I needed because David hasn't worked in 5 years. Olivia's eyes flashed. How dare you? My son is fighting for his life. Is he? Helen challenged, surprising herself with her boldness. Because I've never once spoken directly to any of his doctors, not once in 5 years. That's because you're never there when it matters, always running off to your precious jobs, leaving me to handle the real burden. Helen felt a flare of anger that she'd suppressed for too long. The real burden? You mean like the $4,700 monthly payments to that Swiss clinic? Or the special organic diet that costs more than our rent? Or maybe the premium cable package David needs for his mental health? Olivia took a step back, something calculating in her gaze. You've changed, she said slowly, ever since that lawyer showed up. What did your aunt leave you exactly? The abrupt shift in topic confirmed Helen's suspicions. This had never been about David's health. It had always been about money. That's between me and my aunt's estate, Helen replied, grabbing her purse. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an appointment. Olivia moved to block her path. David is your husband? Helen. What's yours is his. That's how marriage works. Strange. That principle never seemed to apply when it was my time, my energy, my paychecks. You ungrateful little... Olivia caught herself, forced a smile that never reached her eyes. Helen, dear, I understand this inheritance might feel like independence to you, but David needs you now more than ever. His latest test results. Helen waited for the familiar stab of worry, the automatic response of concern that had dictated her actions for years. It didn't come. What test results, Olivia? From which doctor? For which condition? Because in 5 years, I've heard about lupus, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, an unidentified autoimmune disorder, and atypical presentation of multiple conditions. Yet somehow no specialist has ever given a definitive diagnosis. Olivia's face flushed an angry red. How dare you question my son's suffering? After all he's been through. What exactly has he been through, Olivia? Because from where I stand, it looks like he's been through a lot of expensive treatments that never seem to improve his condition, yet somehow leave him well enough to play video games for 8 hours straight when he thinks I'm not paying attention. A door opened down the hall. David emerged, his hair disheveled in what Helen now recognized as a carefully calculated way, just messy enough to suggest suffering, not so messy as to be actually unappealing. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice adopting the weak, raspy quality he reserved for mornings and hospital visits. "Mom? Helen?" Olivia rushed to his side. "Nothing, darling. Helen and I were just discussing your new treatment plan." David leaned heavily against his mother, casting a suspicious glance at Helen. "You're dressed. Where are you going so early?" "Out," Helen said simply. "Out? What does that mean?" "I need my morning medications, and you know I can't take them on." An empty stomach. Helen looked between mother and son, seeing clearly for the first time how their performances complemented each other. Olivia, the devoted mother, David, the suffering patient. A well-rehearsed duet designed to extract maximum sympathy, service, and now, money. "Your mother brought your special breakfast," Helen said, moving toward the door. "She can help you with your medications." David straightened slightly, alarm, replacing the cultivated weakness in his face. "You can't just leave. I have an appointment at 10. Call a taxi," Helen said, her hand on the doorknob. Olivia gasped. "Have you lost your mind? You know David can't travel alone when he's having a flare-up." "Then you take him, Olivia. You're his mother. You've orchestrated everything else in his life. Why stop at driving him places?" The silence that followed was deafening. Mother and son stared at Helen as if seeing a stranger. "Where is this coming from?" David asked, his voice losing its frailty. "Is this about the inheritance? Because if you think you're going to take that money and abandon your responsibilities..." "My responsibilities," Helen repeated softly. She looked at the man she had married, searching for any trace of the person she'd fallen in love with. There was nothing. Perhaps there never had been. "When exactly did I become solely responsible for your well-being, David? When did your mother? At what point did you decide that your life was everyone else's burden to carry?" "Helen," Olivia hissed. "That's enough." But it wasn't enough. After 5 years of silence, of accommodation, of crushing her own needs to fulfill theirs, Helen found she had so much more to say. Instead, she opened the door. "I'll be back later. Or maybe I won't." The look of stunned disbelief on both their faces gave her the strength to step over the threshold and close the door behind her. The cafe was tucked away on a quiet street Helen had never visited before. Early morning sunlight filtered through large windows, casting a warm glow on the wooden tables. Only a few patrons sat scattered throughout the space, most hidden behind newspapers or laptop screens. Mr. Porter was already waiting, his briefcase placed neatly beside a pot of steaming tea. He stood as Helen approached, concern evident in his expression. "Mrs. Chambers," he greeted her, pulling out a chair. "You look troubled." Helen managed a bitter smile as she sat down. That's one way to put it. A waitress appeared with another cup, filling it with fragrant tea before discreetly stepping away. Helen wrapped her cold fingers around the warm porcelain, drawing strength from its heat. "I'm ready to see what's in the envelope," she said, without preamble. Mr. Porter nodded, his face solemn. "Your aunt was very specific about this information. She wanted you to see it only when you were truly ready to face the truth. And how? Did she expect to know when that would be?" Helen asked, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. Claire believed you would reach out when the moment was right. She had great faith in your inner strength, even if you couldn't see it yourself. Helen pulled Claire's journal from her purse and carefully extracted the sealed envelope. Her name was written across it in Claire's elegant script, followed by the words, "When you're ready to reclaim your life." With trembling fingers, Helen broke the seal and pulled out several photographs, a USB drive, and a handwritten note. The first photo showed David, walking confidently out of the hospital's main entrance, laughing with a male nurse. The timestamp indicated it was taken during what should have been one of his critical treatment sessions. The second photo was even more damning. David at a bar, his arm around a woman who definitely wasn't Helen, holding a beer in his supposedly medically sensitive hand. The third showed him loading shopping bags into his mother's car, outside an expensive men's clothing store. Helen's chest tightened as she flipped through image after image, irrefutable evidence of a double life. David playing tennis at a country club. David enjoying a lavish meal with Olivia and several friends. David dancing at what appeared to be a nightclub. No trace of weakness or illness in his animated movements. "There's more on the drive," Mr. Porter said quietly. "Bank statements, showing withdrawals from your joint account coinciding with these outings. Medical reports that Claire's investigator obtained, all showing no evidence of any chronic condition." Helen set down the photos, her hands shaking. "How long?" she whispered. How long was she having him followed? "Almost a year. She hired the investigator after your last Thanksgiving together. She said something shifted in her that day, seeing how he treated you, how diminished you'd become." Helen unfolded Claire's letter, recognizing the strong, decisive handwriting. "My dear Helen, if you're reading this, you've finally allowed yourself to see the truth. David is not ill, at least not in any physical sense. He is, however, something far more dangerous, a parasite who has attached himself to your compassion and twisted it into chains to bind you. You remind me so much of your mother. She too gave everything of herself until there was nothing left. I watched her disappear into your father's shadow year by year, convincing herself that love meant sacrifice without reciprocation. I could not save her, but perhaps I can save you. The money I'm leaving you is not just financial security, it's freedom. Use it wisely. Build the life you deserve, not the prison David has constructed around you. Remember who you were before him. That woman is strong enough to walk away. With love and faith in your courage." Claire tears blurred Helen's vision as she carefully refolded the letter. 5 years. 5 years of her life dedicated to a lie so elaborate, so calculated, that she'd never questioned its foundation. "There's something else you should know," Mr. Porter said, opening his briefcase. "Your aunt left specific instructions about how her estate should be handled if certain circumstances arose." He placed another document on the table. "This is a copy of Claire's will. The original is safe with my firm. You'll notice that she included a provision regarding David." Helen skimmed the legal text, her eyes catching on a particular clause. "Should my niece's husband, David Chambers, attempt to claim any portion of this inheritance through legal means, manipulation, or coercion, an additional sealed file will be submitted to the appropriate authorities detailing evidence of insurance fraud, financial misrepresentation, and medical falsification." "She had proof of crimes?" Helen asked, stunned. "Enough to prompt a serious investigation at minimum." Claire was extremely thorough. She wanted to ensure that if David tried to fight for the money, he would face consequences beyond losing the inheritance. Helen sat back, overwhelmed by the magnitude of Claire's foresight and protection. "Yesterday," she began slowly, "David and his mother brought a banker to our apartment. They already knew about the inheritance somehow. They were pressing me to reveal the amount." Mr. Porter's expression darkened. "That's concerning. The notification of inheritance should have been confidential. Olivia works at the hospital. She has access to records, connections. Maybe she heard something. Perhaps. Or perhaps someone at my firm was indiscreet." He made a note in a small leather-bound notebook. "I'll look into it. In the meantime, Mrs. Chambers—" "Helen," she interrupted. "Please call me Helen." He nodded with a slight smile. "Helen, I'm concerned about your safety. Men like your husband, those who construct elaborate deceptions, can become unpredictable when their schemes unravel." The thought sent a chill through Helen. All these years, she'd viewed David as weak, dependent. The idea that he might be dangerous had never occurred to her. "What should I do?" she asked, suddenly feeling vulnerable. Claire anticipated this as well. Mr. Porter pulled out a key card and a small envelope. She maintained a furnished apartment in the city. It's paid up for the next 2 years, with utilities included. The address is inside. No one knows about it except for myself and now you. Helen took the key with trembling fingers. A safe place, an escape. And the inheritance itself? She asked, forcing herself to focus on practical matters despite the emotional storm raging inside her. The preliminary valuation is complete. He handed her another document. This is the approximate total, pending final assessment of the remaining collection items. Helen glanced at the figure and nearly dropped the paper. Millions. Far more than she'd imagined. There's one more video from Claire, Mr. Porter said, placing the tablet before her. She asked that you watch it after seeing the evidence. With a deep breath, Helen pressed play. Claire appeared on screen, sitting in the same study as before, but looking even more frail. Despite her physical weakness, her eyes burned with intensity. Helen, if you're watching this, you've seen the truth about David. I don't take any pleasure in being right about him. She leaned closer to the camera. What matters now is what you do with this knowledge. You have resources now, both financial and emotional. Use them to rebuild your life. Claire's expression softened. I know you're feeling foolish right now. Don't. Compassion is never foolish. It's what makes you beautiful. David exploited that beauty, but that doesn't diminish its value. A tear slipped down Helen's cheek as Claire continued. Your mother never found the strength to leave. I hope you will. Not just for yourself, but for the legacy of women in our family. Break the pattern, Helen. Show that our worth isn't measured by our capacity for suffering. The screen went dark, and Helen sat in silence, Claire's words echoing in her mind. Break the pattern. 5 years of her life were gone, dedicated to a lie. But how many more would she lose if she stayed? Her phone buzzed. 17 missed. Calls from David and 6 text messages, the last one reading, If you don't come home now, I'm calling the police to report you missing. Your behavior is clearly a mental health crisis. Helen showed the message to Mr. Porter. Classic manipulation tactic, he said grimly. He's trying to regain control. What do I do now? Helen asked, clutching Claire's journal to her chest like a shield. That, Mr. Porter said gently, is entirely up to you. For the first time in years, your life is your own again. Helen sat in her car outside the apartment building that Mr. Porter had shown her. The key card felt heavy in her palm, a tangible symbol of escape, of possibilities. After leaving the cafe, she'd driven around the city for hours, her mind churning with revelations and decisions that needed to be made. Her phone continued to vibrate with messages from David, alternating between threats, emotional manipulation, and desperate pleas. Your behavior is extremely concerning. Mom thinks you might be having a breakdown. Please come home. I'm worried sick about you. My blood pressure is through the roof. If you don't respond in 1 hour, I'm calling the police. Baby, please. Whatever's bothering you, we can work it out. I need you. The last message had come 10 minutes ago. I've had to call Dr. Mitchell for an emergency appointment. I'm being admitted to the hospital right now because of the stress you're causing. If you ever loved me, you'll come. Helen stared at the message, a strange calm settling over her. The old Helen would have rushed to the hospital, drowning in guilt and apologies. The new Helen, born from Claire's revelations, saw the message for what it was, another manipulation tactic. But something else caught her attention. The hospital, the one place David assumed she would always come running to, the one place she had never questioned, never investigated firsthand. A sudden memory surfaced, something she'd overheard weeks ago while waiting for David. 2 patients in the lobby, speaking quietly. You coming to Marcus's thing tonight? Wouldn't miss it. 6th floor is always lit on Thursdays. Yeah, make sure Olivia doesn't catch you. She only wants certain people knowing about the parties. She dismissed it then as patients gossiping about hospital staff. But now, Helen started her car with newfound determination. Instead of responding to David's message, she would see for herself what an emergency hospitalization really looked like. Mercy General loomed ahead, its windows reflecting the late afternoon sun. Helen parked in the visitor lot but didn't head to the main entrance. Instead, she walked toward the employee entrance she'd seen Olivia use countless times. Luck was on her side. A group of scrub-clad staff were exiting, holding the door open. As they chatted, Helen slipped in behind them, nodding as though she belonged. Her waitress uniform wasn't dissimilar to some hospital staff attire. enough to avoid immediate questioning. She knew David's usual room was on the 4th floor, in the private wing that Olivia had always insisted was necessary for his condition. Helen took the stairs instead of the elevator, less chance of running into Olivia that way. The 4th floor was quieter than the main hospital areas, its hallways softly lit and carpeted. Helen moved carefully, her heart pounding as she approached. Room 412, David's supposed regular room. She paused outside, listening. Nothing. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open slightly. The room was empty. The bed perfectly made, no sign of occupation. Confused, Helen checked the nameplate beside the door. Reserved. Mitchell. D. Dr. Mitchell. David's supposed primary physician, the doctor Helen had never met, whose name wasn't in their insurance records. It wasn't a patient room at all. It was a doctor's private rest area. As Helen stood frozen by this discovery, voices approached from around the corner. She ducked into the empty room, leaving the door slightly ajar. Can't believe she just disappeared, David's voice, lacking any trace of weakness or illness. She's never defied me like this before. Calm down, darling, Olivia's voice responded. She'll come crawling back. She always does. Women like Helen don't know how to exist without someone to serve. But what if she talks to that lawyer again? What if she finds out about... She won't. She's far too naive. Besides, even if she suspects something, what proof does she have? Their footsteps paused just outside the door. Helen held her breath, pressing herself against the wall. I need that inheritance, Mom. David's voice had hardened. Do you know how much I owe Marcus? The gambling debts are piling up and he's not being patient anymore. I know, sweetheart. We'll figure it out. Helen will give you the money. She always gives you whatever you want. Not this time. David's voice was cold, calculating, a tone Helen had never heard before. Something's different. That damned aunt of hers must have poisoned her mind against me. Then we'll just have to remind her of her obligations. The party tonight will help you relax. Melanie's been asking about you. Melanie. The name struck Helen like a physical blow. Who was Melanie? Yeah, well, Melanie doesn't pay the bills, does she? Not like my devoted wife. A bitter laugh followed. Their voices faded as they continued down the hall. Helen remained frozen, struggling to process what she'd heard. Gambling debts? Parties? Melanie? After ensuring they were gone, Helen slipped out of the room and followed, the direction they'd headed, staying close to the wall. At the end of the hallway, they'd entered an elevator. The display showed it ascending to the 6th floor. The 6th floor, where the parties were, always lit on Thursdays. Helen found another stairwell and climbed to the 6th floor. As she emerged, she immediately noticed the difference. This floor didn't look like a patient ward at all. The lighting was dimmer, and there was faint music coming from behind a set of double doors marked Staff Only. She approached cautiously, her legs trembling beneath her. Through a small window in the door, she could see a scene that shattered the last remnants of her delusions. The large room, clearly once a rehabilitation space, had been transformed into something resembling a lounge. Comfortable furniture was arranged in conversational groups. A bar was set up in one corner, and music played from an expensive speaker system. About 20 people milled about, some in hospital scrubs, others in casual clothes. And there was David, standing at the center of a laughing group, a drink in his hand, his arm around a stunning blonde woman. Gone was any trace of the sickly, frail husband Helen had dedicated her life to. This David stood tall and confident, his face animated as he delivered what appeared to be the punchline of a joke. The blonde, Melanie, leaned into him, whispering, something in his ear that made him grin broadly before he pulled her closer. Helen felt physically ill, bile rising in her throat. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that it seemed to alter the physical world around her. Colors sharpened painfully. Sounds became too loud. 5 years of her life sacrificed for this man who had never been sick, who had been living. A double life right under her nose. Can I help you? A sharp voice cut through her shock. Helen turned to find a nurse eyeing her suspiciously. I was looking for my husband. Helen managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Patients aren't allowed on this floor, the nurse said firmly. You'll need to return to the visitor areas. My husband isn't a patient, Helen said, her voice finding strength in truth. He just pretends to be. The nurse's expression changed, recognition dawning. You're Helen, David's wife. Helen nodded, suddenly wary. The nurse glanced around before leaning closer. I'm Patty. I've wanted to tell you for years, but Olivia threatened my job. She runs this floor, turned it into a playground for her son and his friends when the West Wing was temporarily closed for renovations. Most administration doesn't even know. Helen stared at her, the pieces falling into place. All those times I waited downstairs. He was up here, Patty confirmed, disgust evident in her tone. Partying, gambling, entertaining, various companions. Through the window, Helen watched as David leaned down to kiss the blonde woman, his hands wandering possessively across her body. The same body he claimed was too weak to work, too fragile to function without Helen's constant support. I've seen enough, Helen whispered, turning away as tears burned her eyes. Do you need help getting out? Patty asked gently. Olivia sometimes stations people at the main exits when David's entertaining. Is there another way out? Patty nodded, gesturing toward a service elevator. This goes down to the loading dock. No one will see you there. As Helen fled, the full weight of her situation crashed over her. It wasn't just that David had lied about being sick. He'd created an entire shadow life, one that included parties, other women, and gambling, all while Helen worked herself to exhaustion to support him. In her car, she finally allowed the tears to come. Not tears of sadness, but of rage. Pure, cleansing rage that burned away the last of her uncertainty. She pulled out her phone and texted Mr. Porter. I've seen everything I need to see. I want to move forward with the divorce immediately, and I need to change all my accounts. Today, his response came quickly. Come to the office. We'll start now. As Helen drove away from Mercy General, she didn't look back. The hospital that had been the center of her life for 5 years now represented the most elaborate deception imaginable. For the first time, she was driving toward something, not just away, toward freedom, toward justice, toward the woman Claire had always believed she could be. Mr. Porter's law firm occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building. Unlike the ostentatious firms with marble lobbies and imposing artwork, Blackwell & Associates projected understated competence. The reception area featured comfortable seating, warm lighting, and staff who greeted Helen with genuine warmth. Mrs. Chambers, the receptionist said, standing to greet her. Mr. Porter is expecting you. Please follow me. As she was led through the office, Helen felt strangely calm. The rage that had consumed her in the hospital parking lot had crystallized into something harder, more focused. For 5 years, she had lived in a fog of exhaustion and manipulation. Now, everything was painfully clear. Mr. Porter was waiting. In a conference room with a woman he introduced as Diane Foster, the firm's top divorce attorney. Helen, Mr. Porter said, concern evident in his voice. You look different. I feel different, she replied, taking a seat. I went to the hospital, saw everything with my own eyes. Diane leaned forward. Would you be willing to tell us what you saw? Details will be important for the divorce proceedings. Helen recounted her discovery. The empty patient room, the conversation between David and Olivia, the party on the 6th floor, and David's involvement with another woman. With each sentence, her voice grew stronger. I have a few questions, Diane said when Helen finished. Has David ever been physically abusive? No. Helen shook her head. His manipulation was always emotional, financial. He'd guilt me, gaslight me, make me question my own perceptions. And did you maintain separate finances? Or were all accounts joint? We have one joint checking account where my paychecks were deposited. David claimed he couldn't work because of his illness, so I've been the only one contributing. He has his own credit cards that I pay off each month. Diane made notes. And these medical expenses, do you have records of them? Some. Most payments went through Olivia, or directly to the hospital. David always said it was easier that way since his mother worked there. I suspect many of those payments were diverted, Mr. Porter interjected. Claire's investigator found evidence suggesting money meant for treatments was actually funding David's gambling and lifestyle. Helen's phone buzzed again. Another text from David. Where the hell are you? I've been discharged from the hospital and need you to pick me up now. She showed the message to the lawyers. He wasn't even admitted. I just saw him partying upstairs. This is textbook emotional abuse and financial exploitation, Diane said, her expression grim. With Claire's evidence and your first-hand account, we have a strong case. The court won't look kindly on someone who faked illness to exploit their spouse. What do I do now? Helen asked. First, we need to protect your inheritance and secure your finances, Mr. Porter said. I've arranged for a bank representative to meet us here. We'll open new accounts in your name only. David will be furious when he realizes he can't access. The money, Helen said, a flicker of old fear surfacing briefly. That's why we've also arranged for a security service, Diane explained. Once we serve David with divorce papers, they'll ensure he stays away from you, and the apartment you mentioned is in a secure building with 24-hour doormen. Helen nodded, taking in the efficient way these professionals were dismantling the prison that had contained her for so long. All those years of feeling helpless, trapped by David's needs, and now a team of strangers was showing her a clear path to freedom. Her phone buzzed yet again, this time with a call from Olivia. Helen declined it, only for a text to appear. Seconds later, David is having severe chest pains because of your selfish behavior. The doctor says he needs to know you're safe or his condition could worsen. At least tell us the inheritance amount so we can plan his treatments. Something cold and clear crystallized in Helen's mind. They still thought they had leverage over her. They still believed her compassion could be weaponized against her. They're still pushing for the inheritance amount, she told the lawyers, showing them Olivia's message. Mr. Porter's expression darkened. They're persistent. I'll give them that. I should tell them something, Helen said slowly, an idea forming. Not the truth, but something to keep them occupied while we get everything in order. Diane and Mr. Porter exchanged glances. What did you have in mind? Diane asked. If I tell them the real amount, they'll never stop coming after it. But if I tell them it's much less, Helen trailed off, thinking. A strategic misdirection. Mr. Porter nodded thoughtfully. Claire would approve. Helen composed a text to David. Fine. Since you won't stop asking, the inheritance is $47,000. That's it. Aunt Claire wasn't as wealthy as the lawyer initially thought. Most of her collection was worthless reproductions. Is that believable? She asked, showing the draft to the lawyers. It's perfect, Diane said. Substantial enough to interest him, but not so large that he'd go to extraordinary lengths to get it. And it explains why you've been hesitant to share the amount, Mr. Porter added. You were processing your disappointment. Helen pressed send, a strange sense of satisfaction flowing through her as she imagined David's reaction. For the first time, she was the one controlling the narrative. 3 dots appeared immediately as David typed his response. $47K? That's it? Your lawyer made it sound like millions. What the hell, Helen? I've been counting on that money for my treatments. Helen showed the response to the lawyers, a bitter smile playing at her lips. See? He doesn't even try to hide it anymore. It's all about what he expected to get. Her phone buzzed again. You need to come home right now so we can discuss this. I've already contacted a financial advisor. That money needs to be properly managed. He still thinks he has control over me, Helen marveled, the realization both horrifying and oddly freeing. This buys us time, Diane said. While he's focused on a relatively small sum, we'll secure the actual inheritance and set up your new life. The bank representative arrived, and Helen spent the next hour opening new accounts and transferring her limited personal savings. It wasn't much. David had ensured she never accumulated significant funds of her own, but it was a start. What about the apartment? Helen asked. The lease is in my name since David claimed he was too ill to deal with stressful paperwork. That works in our favor, Diane explained. Legally, you have the right to determine who lives there. We'll include continued exclusive use of the apartment in our initial filing. As the afternoon progressed, Helen felt herself transforming. Each signature, each decision, each step toward independence strengthened her resolve. The woman who had entered the law office was not the same one who sat there now, calmly planning the dismantling of her toxic marriage. Mr. Porter received a call and stepped aside to take it. When he returned, his expression was serious. That was the office of the hospital administrator, he said. One of Claire's final acts was to file a formal complaint about Olivia's misuse of hospital facilities. She requested that the investigation be delayed until after her death to protect you from immediate fallout. Helen stared at him. Claire did that? She was extraordinarily thorough in her plans to free you. The hospital is launching a full investigation into the 6th floor activities. They're particularly interested in the misappropriation of patient rooms and potential insurance fraud. Fresh tears sprang to Helen's eyes, not of sadness or fear, but of overwhelming gratitude for an aunt who had seen her value when she couldn't see it herself. Her phone buzzed one final time, a message from David that made her smile grimly. $47,000 is nothing. After everything I've been through, everything I've suffered, I deserve more. You're hiding something, Helen. I know it. You've never been able to lie to me. Helen set the phone down without responding. David was right about one thing. She had never been good at lying to him. But she was learning. And this time, her deception wasn't for his benefit, but for her freedom. The law office had arranged everything with remarkable efficiency. By late afternoon, Helen had new bank accounts, a preliminary divorce filing prepared, and a security team briefed on her situation. Mr. Porter had insisted on having someone drive her to Claire's apartment, her apartment now, citing concerns about David's potential reaction once he realized the extent of her rebellion. "You don't know him like I do," Helen had said. "He'll be too focused on the money to worry about me. To David, I've only ever been a means to an end." Still, she accepted the security precaution, if only to honor Claire's meticulous planning. As the car pulled away from the law office, Helen felt a strange lightness. For the first time in 5 years, she had no desperate husband to rush home to, no emergency medications to administer, no elaborate meal plans to follow. The absence of those burdens was almost dizzying. "Where would you like to go, Mrs. Chambers?" asked Marco, the security specialist assigned to her. "The apartment?" Helen checked her watch. "Just past 4 p.m. "Not yet," she said, surprising herself. "There's something I need to do first." The travel agency was tucked between a bookstore and a cafe on a tree-lined street downtown. "Worldwide Horizons," read the sign, with a globe logo that had faded slightly from sun exposure. Helen had passed it countless times during her hurried commutes between jobs, always with a pang of wistful longing. "I'll wait here," Marco said, parking across the street. "Take your time." The bell above the door chimed softly as Helen entered. A middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair looked up from her computer, offering a warm smile. "Hello there, I'm Patricia. How can I help you today?" Helen hesitated. In all her planning at the law office, this impulsive stop hadn't been part of the strategy. Yet something had pulled her here, some need to make her newfound freedom tangible. "I want to go somewhere," she said finally, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "Somewhere I've never been." Patricia gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Well, you've come to the right place. Any particular destination in mind?" Helen sat down, suddenly overwhelmed by possibilities. In 5 years of marriage to David, she had never taken a vacation. Even weekend trips had been impossible with his supposed medical needs and her crushing work schedule. "I've never left the country," she admitted softly. "Never even had a passport." If Patricia found this surprising, she didn't show it. "Then this is an exciting moment. Tell me, what draws you? Beaches, mountains, historic cities, remote villages?" An image flashed in Helen's mind. A faded photograph in Claire's apartment of her aunt standing before ancient ruins, looking fiercely independent and utterly alive. "Greece," Helen said decisively. "My aunt traveled there. She loved it. Excellent choice." Patricia nodded, typing something into her computer. Greece offers such a wonderful combination of history, beauty, and culture. "When were you thinking of traveling?" The question gave Helen pause. When? The concept of planning her own schedule, of making decisions based solely on her own desires, was still so new. "As soon as possible," she said. "Once my passport comes through, we can expedite that process," Patricia assured her. "There are agencies that can get it done in as little as 2 weeks for an additional fee." 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, she could be standing on foreign soil, breathing air that David had never tainted with his demands and manipulations. As Patricia outlined various itineraries and options, Helen found herself genuinely engaged for the first time in years. She asked questions, expressed preferences, even laughed at Patricia's amusing anecdote about getting lost in a tiny Greek village. It was as if parts of her personality that had been dormant under David's shadow were awakening, stretching toward the light. "Now, will anyone be joining you on this journey?" Patricia asked casually. "No," Helen said, a smile spreading across her face. "Just me." An hour later, she left the travel agency with a preliminary itinerary, information about expedited passports, and something even more valuable in a sense of purpose. This wasn't just an escape from David. It was her first step toward the life she'd put on hold. Back in the car, Marco noticed her changed demeanor. "Good news?" he asked. "I'm going to Greece," Helen said, the statement still surreal. "Once the divorce is filed and my passport comes through." Marco nodded approvingly. "Fresh starts are good. Where to now?" Helen checked her phone. 15 missed calls from David, 8 from Olivia, and several increasingly frantic texts. The most recent read, "Police are on their way to file a missing persons report. This is your last chance to stop this insanity." The courthouse, Helen decided. "I want to file those divorce papers today." The county courthouse was imposing, its stone steps leading up to towering doors that seemed designed to intimidate ordinary citizens. Helen clutched the envelope of papers Diane had prepared, her heart racing as she climbed each step. Marco remained a respectful distance behind her, present but unobtrusive. "I've done this walk myself," he told her quietly. "Best decision I ever made." Inside, the fluorescent lighting and bureaucratic atmosphere stood in stark contrast to the building's grand exterior. Helen approached the clerk's window, where a tired-looking woman was organizing paperwork. "I'd like to file for divorce," Helen said, her voice stronger than she'd expected. The clerk barely looked up. "Fill these out. Bring them back with your filing fee." She pushed a stack of forms across the counter. "I have the papers prepared." "By my lawyer," Helen explained, offering the envelope. This caught the clerk's attention. She examined the contents, nodding with approval. "Blackwell and Associates. They do good work. Everything seems in order." She stamped several pages and made photocopies. "Case number 789D-2025, she said, handing Helen a receipt. "Service will be arranged by your attorney?" "Yes," Helen confirmed, remembering Diane's explanation that professional process servers would deliver the papers to David. "Good luck," the clerk said, offering a brief but genuine smile, before turning to the next person in line. Outside, Helen stood on the courthouse steps, clutching the receipt, tangible proof that the dissolution of her marriage had begun. The setting sun cast long shadows across the plaza, painting the world in shades of gold and amber. For a moment, she felt suspended between her old life and whatever awaited her next. Her phone buzzed with a new text from David. "Just got a call from some lawyer." "What the hell, Helen? Divorce? After everything I've done for you? After all my suffering? You're really going to abandon a sick man?" The old Helen would have crumbled under the weight of that guilt trip. The new Helen felt only a sad clarity. David would never acknowledge his deception, never admit that his suffering had been an elaborate performance designed to trap her in servitude. "Ready to see your new place?" Marco asked gently, interrupting her thoughts. Helen nodded, tucking the phone away without responding to David's message. The apartment Claire had left her was in a pre-war building with a uniformed doorman and an elegant lobby. Unlike the sterile, medical equipment-filled space she'd shared with David, this apartment welcomed her with warm colors, comfortable furnishings, and walls lined with bookshelves. "Your aunt had excellent taste," Marco observed as Helen wandered through the rooms, trailing her fingers over surfaces that somehow felt both foreign and familiar. In the study, she found a wall of photos, Claire throughout her travels, standing before landmarks across the globe. In each image, her aunt looked directly at the camera with the same challenging expression, as if daring the world to try to contain her. On the desk lay a leather-bound journal, similar to the one Claire had left Helen, but older, more worn. A note was clipped to its cover, "For Helen, when she finds her way home to herself." As Marco discreetly checked the security of the apartment, Helen sank into Claire's desk chair and opened the journal. Inside were not just diary entries but sketches, pressed flowers, ticket stubs, and fragments of a life lived on Claire's own terms. The first entry, dated decades earlier, read, "Today I chose myself over everyone else's expectations. It was the hardest and best decision I've ever made. This is day one of my real life." Helen closed the journal, tears blurring her vision. This was her day one. Despite the pain, despite the wasted years, despite the rage that still simmered beneath, her newfound resolve, today she had chosen herself. Her phone rang again, Olivia this time. Helen turned it off completely and placed it in a drawer. Tomorrow would bring more battles. David would not surrender his meal ticket easily. Olivia would fight to protect her son and herself from the hospital investigation. There would be ugly accusations, attempts at manipulation, perhaps even threats. But tonight, in this space that Claire had prepared for her, Helen allowed herself to simply breathe, to exist without apology or explanation, to begin imagining a life shaped by her own desires rather than someone else's demands. Outside the window, the city lights twinkled like stars, each one a possibility she'd never allowed herself to consider. Helen watched them shimmer, feeling both terrified and exhilarated by the vastness of her newfound freedom. The law office had arranged everything with remarkable efficiency. By late afternoon, Helen had new bank accounts, a preliminary divorce filing prepared, and a security team briefed on her situation. Mr. Porter had insisted on having someone drive her to Claire's apartment, her apartment now, citing concerns about David's potential reaction once he realized the extent of her rebellion. "You don't know him like I do," Helen had said. "He'll be too focused on the money to worry about me. To David, I've only ever been a means to an end." Still, she accepted the security precaution, if only to honor Claire's meticulous planning. As the car pulled away from the law office, Helen felt a strange lightness. For the first time in 5 years, she had no desperate husband to rush home to, no emergency medications to administer, no elaborate meal plans to follow. The absence of those burdens was almost dizzying. "Where would you like to go, Mrs. Chambers?" asked Marco, the security specialist assigned to her. "The apartment?" Helen checked her watch. Just past 4 p.m. "Not yet," she said, surprising herself. "There's something I need to do first." The travel agency was tucked between a bookstore and a cafe on a tree-lined street downtown. "Worldwide Horizons," read the sign, with a globe logo that had faded slightly from sun exposure. Helen had passed it countless times during her hurried commutes between jobs, always with a pang of wistful longing. "I'll wait here," Marco said, parking across the street. "Take your time." The bell above the door chimed softly as Helen entered. A middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair looked up from her computer, offering a warm smile. "Hello there. I'm Patricia. How can I help you today?" Helen hesitated. In all her planning at the law office, this impulsive stop hadn't been part of the strategy. Yet something had pulled her here, some need to make her newfound freedom tangible. "I want to go somewhere," she said finally, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "Somewhere I've never been." Patricia gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Well, you've come to the right place. Any particular destination in mind?" Helen sat down, suddenly overwhelmed by possibilities. In 5 years of marriage to David, she had never taken a vacation. Even weekend trips had been impossible with his supposed medical needs and her crushing work schedule. "I've never left the country," she admitted softly. "Never even had a passport." If Patricia found this surprising, she didn't show it. "Then this is an exciting moment. Tell me, what draws you? Beaches, mountains, historic cities, remote villages?" An image flashed in Helen's mind, a faded photograph in Claire's apartment of her aunt standing before ancient ruins, looking fiercely independent and utterly alive. "Greece," Helen said decisively. "My aunt traveled there. She loved it. Excellent choice," Patricia nodded, typing something into her computer. "Greece offers such a wonderful combination of history, beauty, and culture. When were you thinking of traveling?" The question gave Helen pause. When? The concept of planning her own schedule, of making decisions based solely on her own desires, was still so new. "As soon as possible," she said. "Once my passport comes through, we can expedite that process," Patricia assured her. "There are agencies that can get it done in as little as 2 weeks for an additional fee." 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, she could be standing on foreign soil, breathing air that David had never tainted with his demands and manipulations. As Patricia outlined various itineraries and options, Helen found herself genuinely engaged for the first time in years. She asked questions, expressed preferences, even laughed at Patricia's amusing anecdote about getting lost in a tiny Greek village. It was as if parts of her personality that had been dormant under David's shadow were awakening, stretching toward the light. "Now, will anyone be joining you on this journey?" Patricia asked casually. "No," Helen said, a smile spreading across her face. "Just me." An hour later, she left the travel agency with a preliminary itinerary, information about expedited passports, and something even more valuable, a sense of purpose. This wasn't just an escape from David. It was her first step toward the life she'd put on hold. Back in the car, Marco noticed her changed demeanor. "Good news?" he asked. "I'm going to Greece," Helen said, the statement still surreal. "Once the divorce is filed and my passport comes through." Marco nodded approvingly. "Fresh starts are good. Where to now?" Helen checked her phone. 15 missed calls from David, 8 from Olivia, and several increasingly frantic texts. The most recent read, "Police are on their way to file a missing persons report. This is your last chance to stop this insanity." The courthouse, Helen decided. "I want to file those divorce papers today." The county courthouse was imposing, its stone steps leading up to towering doors that seemed designed to intimidate ordinary citizens. Helen clutched the envelope of papers Diane had prepared, her heart racing as she climbed each step. Marco remained, a respectful distance behind her, present but unobtrusive. "I've done this walk myself," he told her quietly. "Best decision I ever made." Inside, the fluorescent lighting and bureaucratic atmosphere stood in stark contrast to the building's grand exterior. Helen approached the clerk's window, where a tired-looking woman was organizing paperwork. "I'd like to file for divorce," Helen said, her voice stronger than she'd expected. The clerk barely looked up. "Fill these out. Bring them back with your filing fee." She pushed a stack of forms across the counter. "I have the papers prepared by my lawyer," Helen explained, offering the envelope. This caught the clerk's attention. She examined the contents, nodding with approval. "Blackwell and Associates. They do good work. Everything seems in order." She stamped several pages and made photocopies. "Case number 789D-2025, she said, handing Helen a receipt. "Service will be arranged by your attorney?" "Yes," Helen confirmed, remembering Diane's explanation that professional process servers would deliver the papers to David. "Good luck," the clerk said, offering a brief but genuine smile before turning to the next person in line. Outside, Helen stood on the courthouse steps, clutching the receipt, tangible proof that the dissolution of her marriage had begun. The setting sun cast long shadows across the plaza, painting the world in shades of gold and amber. For a moment, she felt suspended between her old life and whatever awaited her next. Her phone buzzed with a new text from David. "Just got a call. From some lawyer." "What the hell, Helen? Divorce? After everything I've done for you? After all my suffering? You're really going to abandon a sick man?" The old Helen would have crumbled under the weight of that guilt trip. The new Helen felt only a sad clarity. David would never acknowledge his deception, never admit that his suffering had been an elaborate performance designed to trap her in servitude. "Ready to see your new place?" Marco asked gently, interrupting her thoughts. Helen nodded, tucking the phone away without responding to David's message. The apartment Claire had left her was in a pre-war building with a uniformed doorman and an elegant lobby. Unlike the sterile, medical equipment-filled space she'd shared with David, this apartment welcomed her with warm colors, comfortable furnishings, and walls lined with bookshelves. "Your aunt had excellent taste," Marco observed as Helen wandered through the rooms, trailing her fingers over surfaces that somehow felt both foreign and familiar. In the study, she found a wall of photos, Claire throughout her travels, standing before landmarks across the globe. In each image, her aunt looked directly at the camera with the same challenging expression, as if daring the world to try to contain her. On the desk lay a leather-bound journal similar to the one Claire had left Helen, but older, more worn. A note was clipped to its cover, for Helen, when she finds her way home to herself. As Marco discreetly checked the security of the apartment, Helen sank into Claire's desk chair and opened the journal. Inside were not just diary entries, but sketches, pressed flowers, ticket stubs, and fragments of a life lived on Claire's own terms. The first entry, dated decades earlier, read, "Today I chose myself over everyone else's expectations. It was the hardest and best decision I've ever made. This is day one of my real life." Helen closed the journal, tears blurring her vision. This was her day one. Despite the pain, despite the wasted years, despite the rage that still simmered beneath her newfound resolve, today she had chosen herself. Her phone rang again, Olivia this time. Helen turned it off completely and placed it in a drawer. Tomorrow would bring more battles. David would not surrender his meal ticket easily. Olivia would fight to protect her son and herself from the hospital investigation. There would be ugly accusations, attempts at manipulation, perhaps even threats. But tonight, in this space that Claire had prepared for her, Helen allowed herself to simply breathe, to exist without apology or explanation, to begin imagining a life shaped by her own desires rather than someone else's demands. Outside the window, the city lights twinkled like stars, each one a possibility she'd never allowed herself to consider. Helen watched them shimmer, feeling both terrified and exhilarated by the vastness of her newfound freedom.